Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this event in The Hague, in the Netherlands. Welcome those who are attending and those who are with us online. This event has been called to be held in The Hague, which is the seat of the International Criminal Court, because it concerns the gross human rights violations that are presently taking place in Tunisia. Tunisia is a member state of the ICC. It has been since June of 2011. So a well-established member of the ICC. And that is why we are here today. The families of those who are detained in Tunisia, who have been directly affected by the clampdown by the Tunisian government. We are calling on the government to uphold its obligations under the Rome Statute of the ICC. Under that statute, those who have signed up should not be committing serious crimes against civilians, crimes against humanity. These are crimes that are outlawed by the statute and by international law. In particular, the unlawful imprisonment of persons contrary to international standards. Also, the persecution of persons based on their views, including their political views. And inhumane acts against persons who are targeted, detained, rounded up, in some cases tortured. We have seen not only the arrests of opposition figures, political figures, judges, human rights defenders, those in the media, trade union leaders, a range of persons across the board. Anyone who has offered dissent to the current regime is being targeted and arrested. And when arrested, not given their due and proper rights, according to international standards. No arrest warrants, no clear notice of what the charges are in many cases. Or if there are charges, they are so vague, it's impossible to work out what they relate to. Difficulties in getting access to lawyers and family members on an unimpeded and effective basis. Unfair trials without due process that are rushed and where the rights of the accused are not respected. But also on top of that, highly inflammatory racist remarks being made by the current president and his government in relation to migrants in Tunisia, which has sparked a backlash against those persons and is likely to get even worse unless it is remedied. So a host of serious, widespread systemic violations that are taking place, all which breach the provisions of the Rome Statute. This is a statute that Tunisia signed up to, in which, in the very preamble of that statute, Tunisia has committed itself to end impunity, not to do the opposite and escalate it, but to end impunity and to ensure that serious international crimes are investigated and prosecuted, those crimes that are of most concern to the international community. But we see the reverse happening here. So we are calling on the government today, that is why we're here, to uphold its obligations, to cease the mass violations, to release those who are unlawfully detained, to stop the unfair trials. And we are saying that unless that happens, then as victims, and you'll hear from them directly today, they will seek to exercise their rights before the International Criminal Court and take all available actions. The court allows for victims to approach it to seek the investigation of serious crimes. The prosecutor and others in the court have the ability to go to Tunisia. It's a signed-up member state, and visit it. These are all avenues that will be pursued if necessary. The government must cease its violations, otherwise further steps will have to be taken. And we are calling on the ICC, we are here in The Hague where the ICC is situated, to take notice of what the families are saying. I'm going to introduce the speakers now so you can hear firsthand from those who are experiencing these violations. My name is Rodney Dixon. I am an international lawyer representing a number of those who are detained. We have taken various legal actions, including before the African Court on Human and People's Rights, which is a civil action against the state. We have also looked to apply for sanctions to be imposed against individual perpetrators. The significance of the ICC, however, is that it raises it rightly to the level of criminal investigations and sanctions. If these acts are not going to be punished within the country, because they are being perpetrated by the very authorities that should be investigating them, then they have to be investigated elsewhere. Yes, other countries could do that under universal jurisdiction, but the ICC has jurisdiction, and it could do that as well. So we're emphasizing the criminal responsibility here of those who are committing these widespread violations. Our first speaker today will be an online contribution, and this will be from Ambassador Mohammed Sakabi, who joins us from the US in the early hours of the morning. Thank you very much for being available. He was the former foreign minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina during the appalling conflict that blighted that region, and was also the former vice chair of the ICC Preparatory Committee, which was the founding committee of the ICC. He has spoken out widely on human rights violations, obviously in his country, but throughout the world. And we are grateful for his contribution today to focus on what is happening in Tunisia. Ambassador, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. And let me only support what you have said in terms of the role of the International Criminal Court. I think it's important to highlight here, first of all, that the purpose of the court is not only to investigate and prosecute, but as was highlighted recently in the indictments regarding Ukraine, Putin, and others, there is also an element of deterrence and prevention. And I think in the case of Tunisia, we're talking about a situation that certainly may warrant investigation and prosecution at this time, but may also get worse. And that's one reason to call for action. As you mentioned, Mr. Dixon, Tunisia is a member. It has signed the statute. And as you know, the court nonetheless has universal jurisdiction. And most importantly here, I think the term complementary jurisdiction is appropriate to highlight. Complementary jurisdiction means that national courts would take the primary role in addressing such violations, grave violations, as you have spoken of. But that only assumes that national courts are willing and capable of. And from my understanding of what's going on in Tunisia, Tunisian courts, in fact, may be unable, prevented, or unwilling to take such measures, and therefore the ICC would have to step in. It's also important to highlight, and this goes back to events that we saw happen in the former Yugoslavia, and particularly in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Frequently, religion, ethnicity, race, other factors that are somewhat superficial are highlighted as the cause for some sort of conflict, internal or external. But in fact, very frequently we have come to know that diversity itself, along with the individuals, are the victims. They are the targets. And in this case, I think it's very important that Tunisia here is represented politically and otherwise across the spectrum to negate any claims that somehow this may be one group or another trying to use the ICC as a weapon. Quite to the contrary, we have here a spectrum of civil society. And as you highlighted, along with the victims who are represented, the International Criminal Court does seek sometimes the impetus, the involvement of civil society as well as the victims themselves. So to tie it all up, there is no such thing as a premature request of the ICC to at least investigate and become involved. That may in fact be necessary to prosecute, but it also may help deter and prevent future violations. In fact, it may be a way to cut short the efforts of those who would use crimes against humanity as a means to impose or retain power. As for what else needs to be said, I think the evidence, the testimony, in particular of the victims and their families, should spark the interest of those at the International Criminal Court. And it certainly sparks the interest of those of us who saw the court as having this broad duty, broad responsibility to not only act after the crimes have been committed, but to again emphasize, deter, and prevent. Thank you, and thank you to all the families and civil society.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your very clear and compelling message. I'm going to hand over now to, on my left, Kauthar Fajani, who is the daughter of Said Fajani, a prominent MP in Tunisia, who is currently in detention. And you'll hear directly now of the violations that we have been emphasizing. Thank you, Kauthar.
Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Unfortunately, since my father was arrested 4 months ago, I've been doing variations of this speech around the world, literally 3 continents now. And unfortunately, he's still in prison without charge, as like many of our parents. My father, this isn't his first time in prison under a Tunisian dictator. Previously, it was under the Ben Ali regime. He was severely tortured. He was unable to walk. He would be tortured to the point of being comatose. He fled and came to the UK, where he lived there for 21 years in exile and was a prominent part of the community there and stayed fighting for Tunisia throughout those years. He came back to Tunisia, wanted to build a better future, and continue his commitment to democracy and human rights. But unfortunately, 2 years ago, after the Qais Said's coup, almost immediately, his name was one of the names leaked as one of the people to arrest, because he saw my father, as well as many of our parents, as threats to his fledgling authoritarianism. So my father was initially arrested 4 months ago. He's been questioned on and off as a witness, and eventually he was arrested over trumped up charges in a case that's associated with a digital company that isn't necessarily illegal in Tunisia, that working for the company isn't illegal in Tunisia, but being suspected of possibly associating with a company is what is sending people to prison. My father doesn't have a formal accusation, not been charged. Unfortunately, he's in a prison with over 120 people, a prison cell with over 120 people, with a capacity of maximum 60 people. He has been sent to hospital a few times. One of the times, the first few times actually, was after his hunger strike that he immediately started. He would lose consciousness when they would take him to the hospital, because they would the police would refuse to let him be uncuffed as they retrieved blood. More recently, we have heard that he has been also hospitalized because of the damp conditions and the fact that he's surrounded by nearly 120 people that are chain smoking all day, and now he's had to rely on an inhaler, and something that he's never had to before. So as I've said before, I have been touring pretty much most of the world at this point. We have called for sanctions in the UK. We've called for sanctions in the EU. We have started a civil case in the African courts. I have been to the US as well. And unfortunately, when it comes to Europe, we've had, while the meetings may have gone well, externally, we haven't had that kind of support. And in fact, it's been the opposite. We've seen the whitewashing of the authoritarian regime, and in fact the rewarding of it, with the current deals that they've made because of their anti-immigration stance that they're going through right at the moment. And it's almost disheartening that I've had better luck across the pond from where I live in the US than in Europe and the UK. And what's more disheartening is the fact that, our countries, and by our countries I mean where I'm originally from, Tunisia, MENA, the Middle East, we're constantly being preached to by Europe, by the West, about the values of democracy and human rights and freedom. And yet, when we did have that, we were heavily scrutinized, which was rightly so. But then the moment the tank was in front of Parliament, the moment there was a coup, the moment we've seen all these crackdowns, not only are they nowhere to be seen, but they've actually been almost rewarding that behavior. And so it just shows that, well, what we're learning at the moment is that all those values we've been preached to amount to nothing if they're not in the same interests, if they don't align with Europe. And that's what's been our biggest disappointing takeaway. And this is something that many critics have warned us about, but it's sad to see it in person. Sorry. So again, like as Rodney has said today, why we're here today, we want to raise awareness about our case, raise awareness about Tunisia. Tunisia isn't under the spotlight. It isn't a country that the international community are supporting right now, as other countries that they may have a self-interest in supporting. However, we do believe that these human rights laws and conventions are there for a reason. They're not meant to be for your favorites and not your favorites. We should have it across the board. And so we want to raise awareness for that, for our families, for the people back home, and get the attention from the ICC to hopefully at least investigate what's going on, to deter. It wasn't long ago, it was only 12 years ago that we had like severe repression with a previous dictator. We don't need it to reach that level again to get the attention of the ICC, and I hope the ICC isn't just there for things to only get out of hand. And I know they're there to hopefully, as the ambassador said, to prevent and deter. That's my biggest ask right now. With the people in this country, whether it's journalists and media, is to have a look at where your tax-paying money is going to. It isn't necessarily helping with the anti-immigration. The president isn't going to use the money that he's been given to deter more immigrants and migration. In fact, he's going to create more because the country is currently in despair. And to see that you're inadvertently, by allowing your government to make these deals, you're inadvertently helping human rights violations in Tunisia. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Katha, for your bravery in continuing to call for justice and the determination in, yes, going around the world to seek that. And despite it, a lot of the time falling on deaf ears, we're hoping that through this perseverance, it will make a difference to you and your personal situation, the family, and the country as a whole. I'm going to go back to the online now and welcome Aziz Akremi, who is online from abroad. He is the son of Judge Akremi, who is currently in detention as well. He is a very prominent judge in Tunisia, an independent judge, not a member of any political party, widely known as a true lawyer's lawyer. And yet he has been targeted. He has been dismissed from his position, detained and tortured. And we'll hear directly now from his son. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it really breaks my heart hearing families speak about what's going on in Tunisia, since it hits so close to home. Really, what's going on with Tunisia and what happened with my father, in order to understand it, we need to take a look back a bit to 2020, where the first steps of attacks against the judiciary in Tunisia happened. Basically, in 2020, the president, Kais Saied, decided to remove the Judicial Council and install a new puppet council in its place. And the Judicial Council is the council responsible for all judge movement in Tunisia, and it's usually made up of independent judges that are chosen within the judiciary itself. So after he installed this puppet council, he attacked my father directly by attempting to demote him. And he did demote him. My father had a long career in Tunisia. He worked 34 years as a judge. He worked most of his life as an investigative judge, and towards the end of his career, he worked as a general prosecutor and the head of anti-terrorism. He was responsible and the judge for many very important cases, such as the political assassinations of Sukri Belaid and the terrorist attacks that occurred in Tunisia in 2015 at Sousse and at Bardo. He has worked extensively with the international community, being a big part of UN anti-terrorism and being a prominent member of that international community. He has been to the Hague as many as 14 times at the Eurojust court to have meetings and discuss the investigations ongoing with terrorist attacks. So my father is no lightweight, and the reason he was being targeted was because the dictatorship regime at the time was trying to identify potential problems in their plan to overtake Tunisia and to do this power grab. And the first problem that was gonna arose was the independent judiciary that was at place. The judiciary was a massive issue, so they started attacking it first. So, like I said, in 2020, this puppet judicial council attacked my father and demoted him. My father, being a judge, the only weapon he knew was the law. So he went to the administrative courts and he fought this action, and he won his case. And then later on in 2021, he was suspended by this puppet council, and this was before the coup. So these was first signs. The judiciary at this point was aware that the government was interfering, but the political climate was strange at the time, and it was just we didn't understand. We could not foresee what was going to happen. We could see that that this government is attacking the judiciary, but we could not foresee the extent of these attacks. So after my father suspended, he again went to the administrative court, which was the only court that protects employees against these illegal actions. And again, he won his case and the appeal. But the government simply did not respect these rulings. It ignored court rulings, which shocked my father. The coup happened in 2021, 25th of July, and just after the coup, my father was thrown into house arrest. And again, this targeting was mainly a message to all judges in Tunisia. Hey, if you act, if you stand up against this regime, your fate will be the same fate as this judge. This judge, which was a high-ranking judge, he was the general prosecutor of Tunis and the head of the anti-terrorism agency. So he was effectively the highest-ranking judge at the time in Tunisia. After the coup, he was put into house arrest again illegally for no reason by the president. And then, as everyone knows, just a year after, in 2022, the judge, a Tunisian, not the judge, I'm sorry, the president, a Tunisian president signed an order to fire 57 judges. Yes, the president in Tunisia wrote an order to fire judges. This was a blatant disregard for anything law-related. And this emboldenment and this escalation was just a result of complete inaction and inability to act from the national and international community. And for me to explain the current state of the judiciary is to explain the complete fear and chaos that's ongoing because of these attacks. Not only were these 57 judges fired, but there was a lot of threats against other judges. Today, judges in Tunisia live in complete fear. If you do not comply, you will be suspended. We had 2 judges that simply had their offices locked. They just went to work one day and they found their offices locked, and that's how you get fired in Tunisia nowadays. These are presidential orders. The idea of separation of powers no longer exists. I've been talking to judges almost weekly, and they've all been saying that I wish I was suspended. I wish I'm not working. Working in this climate is hell. For that reason, we need to recognize that Tunisia is part of an international intertwined ecosystem that vowed to protect democracies and fight oppression when it arises. Although the history of maintaining small democracies around the world is tainted, we could still be an example for a better future for African nations. If Africa thrives, the whole world thrives with it, or if MENA thrives. And no country can thrive in the economic pit that the Said regime has created. This economic pit is not only because of the ongoing oppression and attack against freedoms, but it is also because of the complete inability to handle state affairs. This president is completely unable to assign even correct ministers. We have courts in Tunisia today without prosecutors that have been working for 2 years without any head prosecutor. To understand that sentence, it's a complete joke. It's this whole government is slowly collapsing, and we're watching a disaster unfold. And these treaties that Tunisia has signed and signed with other countries to help fight injustice and dictatorship, we should not ignore these treaties. If we ignore these treaties, we will only embolden these regimes and lead to a darker, more brutal world for everyone. We're here today to simply urge the international community to act. and stop the politically motivated attacks in Tunisia, since the Tunisian judiciary, based on many, many testimonies working today, of judges working today, has lost all independence and has effectively collapsed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aziz. Please continue.
Yeah, I just want to add that my father's arrest was also like a very brutal affair. He was not only arrested, but then subsequently tortured in the 12th of February. And to just highlight how horrible the judiciary is at this point, the judge that signed the arrest warrant against my father is a judge that was a witness against him in a previous case. So it's even illegal for him to sign this arrest warrant. And then afterwards, the judge that was handling the case, the investigative judge, is actually an intern of my father. This basically kid has been taught by my father at the anti-terrorism pole, and he's completely terrified. He would tell you, hands up, but my hands are tied, I can't do anything. He refused to even see my father for 2 months, and when he saw him, he couldn't even look him in the eyes. My father has been now in prison for more than 4 months, and this situation and these attacks, and along with many other arrestees and many other families, is only, if this inaction continues, this will only strengthen this regime to do more worse things and more brutal things towards political opponents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I should emphasize that the explanation that has been given is also backed up, as I'm sure Aziz can confirm, by evidence of what happened, including video evidence, which we have available, which can be provided to the court as well. So there's a clear forensic basis for what we are saying, both from what the families are giving in their testimony, but also other material as well. And what I think you've heard highlights, of course, both the very personal and human side, but also shows what is critical when you look at international courts as well. Is something being done within the national jurisdiction? Is there something that you can rely upon there? And when that's not happening, when all of the remedies there are exhausted and there's no possibility of justice, that's why we have these international bodies to step in. And they should not be shy in coming forward when there is a complete inaction or exactly the reverse happening within the national jurisdiction. Otherwise, they encourage it to continue and they encourage other states to follow that pattern. Thank you very much, Aziz, for your very
thank you.
Deeply felt account. Is there something else that you wanted to mention?
No, thank you. Absolutely, yes. Without these international courts and these systems exist to protect democracy and protect countries from falling into the pit of oppression. And if they prove inefficient, if they show inaction, it only emboldens these regimes. Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to now go back to the panel here. Our next speaker, Alias Shawushi, who is the son of Ghazi Shawushi, who is also detained, a very prominent politician in Tunisia, a very well-known and well-respected lawyer as well. Thank you very much for coming all the way today to give your account and what you want to happen.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity today to be with you. Actually, my father was he's actually at the beginning he's a socialist politician, and so from the left side. Just to explain to people who are thinking that that Qais Said today is only arresting and putting in prison Islamist people. No, not real. We have a judge, we have a socialist lawyer, we have journalists, we have democratic, progressive, communist even, and we have also Islamist part of our countries. And they won twice the elections, 2011, 2014, and there was opposite of them, of her father, and that's democracy. As in Holland and all European countries. That's first thing. Second thing, I want to quote statement: "Whoever dare to acquit and innocent all arrested people is part and considered as accomplice." This is a statement of our president, Qais Said, in February, when political arrests started to be in Tunisia. So we can consider this statement as a threat. Yeah, direct threat, especially to the judges who are thinking that if they will if they will be independent and trying to be fair, they will be in the jail with them as accomplice. Also, since the coup d'etat in 2021 July, so almost 2 years, Qais Said changed everything. All independent committees arrested judges, arrested all opponents, politicians, and he jailed the parliament also, and he jailed everything, all institutions except once, the president. Yeah, and then he made a referendum with the participation of 12% of people. He changed the constitutions from parliamentary regime to the presidential one, and then he went for elections, and it was the lowest participation rate in the world. And yeah, I would like kindly to ask journalists to check this. It was 8.8% of participation, and it was the lowest one since I don't know, I think in the last 50 years. It was in Afghanistan, 1983, with 9%, so even more than 8.8%. And then he was focusing on his speech, because he never made any conference with press, with journalists. All his speeches was focusing on his opponents, and he was quoting and stating their names. Imagine, this is the president. He's considered to be as president of all population, all Tunisians. However, he was only president for his friends and for people who are thinking that they are supporting him. And then when focusing on my father, he has 3 judicial complaints, one from Prime Minister, one from Minister of Justice, and the last one, it was direct one on behalf of President as conspiracy. So my father and his comrades, especially from left political orientations, are today accused as complotism and conspiracy to make a coup d'etat on the person who already made a coup. So yeah, it was a malicious judicial files, fabricated ones, without any condemnation, without even staying in front of the judge to tell them what they did exactly. My father asked the police and the people who arrested him, and they arrested him at 2 p.m. At 2 a.m. And yeah, I don't know if it's late night or early morning. Yeah, and they came to make their show, as my father is a terrorist. And they entered to the house, 11 policemen with their dogs, filming, taking cameras, and treating him as a terrorist. You know the rest of the story normally, as on every country. And then he asked those people what I'm accused for, and they told him we have instructions and orders to arrest you, and we are sorry for that. And they did apologize. At least they were a bit polite. Yeah, and then I think that we are here today, as Mr. Dixon said. We want to send a message through journalists, through people, and through witness, that this country, this Tunisian government is a part of the convention and one of the signatories in Rome, and they don't want to go back to the rules of laws, but rather than that, they are more on their repressive measures, and they are still arresting people. And just a message to the Dutch government and on behalf to the EU, I hope that priority of immigration will not be the only one. Releasing and drop charges on political detainees and prisoners is also mandatory, because we have convention between the European Union and Tunisia, as for example the Convention of 1984, Article 2, who prevent and insist and ensure to warrant all democratic and free, democratic laws, and to defend the freedoms of the freedoms in Tunisia. So either that European countries are not focusing on democracy in Tunisia, and that's dangerous, or they are pretending to do it and they have other priorities as immigration to manage with the Tunisian government today. So my message today is to not to intervene in Tunisia with the European army, to stop fundings to Tunisian population, but at least to respect and to warrant all the convention that we have between European Union and Tunisia. And that's my message. Today my father is keeping up like his friends and comrades and colleagues, since he's a lawyer, and he's in the jail, in a prison since 4 months and 2 days today, without any condemnation and without any date. We don't know if one day, for sure he will be released one day, but everyone, as Aziz said, everyone, as judges, people, all activists are afraid today. All of them have the threats to not speak and to not defend democracy. However, we can see that European leaders are sympathizing with Qais Said personally, and also on the government way. Like Mark Rutte, 2 weeks ago, he went there, and we know that he's prime minister in the Netherlands since 12 years today, and I think he knows what's mean democracy. He knows what's mean freedom, and he knows that there are a lot of people in prison today, and we have a list of 49 this morning. Probably tonight they will be more, and yeah, they are all detainees on their political opinions, because they are opponents to this government, and especially to Qais Said, because we are living in autocracy. And I'm not saying that, I'm not describing that, because the simple meaning of autocracy is that one person is taking 3 powers on his hand, and that's the case. Socially, we have a crisis. At least one example, since this person is on the top of government, let's say, the unemployment rate went up from 14 to 17.5%. On Fitch ranking, if we speak about economic crisis, we are ranked as triple C negative. So we are at 1 point before the default, and we are going to the bankrupt. And if European people and leaders are thinking with this bankrupt, immigration will stop, they are not thinking rightly or logically. So today here, based on the constitution, factually, logically, and on every sides, I think that we need to defend our fathers, not because we are victimizing ourselves here, no, but to just send a message to democratic governments, especially European one, especially Dutch one. I will not please them, but I will say try to find a way to communicate with Tunisian government to release prisoners and to find an economic solutions as well. That's it.
Thank you very much, Elias. It highlights both the scale and the depth of the problem, how it affects the society across the board, but then also, as you very eloquently highlighted, what could be done to change that from now. Thank you. I'm going to turn to our last speaker today on the end, Dr. Yusra Ghannouchi. She is the daughter of Rashid Ghannouchi, who is the Speaker of the democratically elected parliament that is now shut down, and also the leader of the opposition. Just a short note at the outset to highlight that all of these steps that have been taken, the shutting down of all these institutions, have in fact gone before the African court that I mentioned early on, and they found that these were unlawful under the African Charter. And yet nothing has been done to reverse that, even though that direction has gone to the current government, yet again showing that these steps to reverse democracy are becoming more entrenched every day. But Dr. Ghannouchi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to talk about Tunisia as it faces this unprecedented onslaught on its democracy. Thank you, Rodney, as well, for your contribution and all the work that you're doing with the families to seek justice for political prisoners in Tunisia. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, Aziz, Kauthar, Elias, for the moving testimonies and for their courage and determination to continue to seek justice for those defending democracy in Tunisia, despite all the risks and the sacrifices involved. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Shakabeh for his invaluable insights based on long experience advocating for justice and for ending human rights violations, and based on experience, sadly, on how inaction or delay in acting to end human rights violations can lead to their deterioration and to genocide, as we had seen in Bosnia. And I'd like to say that it's unfortunate that we have not learned, or Europe has not learned from that history of what inaction or complicity can lead to in terms of the destruction of whole nations. And it's unfortunate today to see that while following the Arab uprisings that started in Tunisia in 2011, we had seen at the time a kind of self-review and reflection in Europe that was promising to review the danger and misguidedness of not acting or supporting dictatorships based on the illusion that they can provide stability, that they can provide prosperity at the expense of democracy and human rights. We have seen clearly that that stability was an illusion, and that dictatorship does not lead to stability. It only leads to instability and to the deepening of political, economic, and social crises. And that's what we're seeing in Tunisia today. I mean, Europe would have been perhaps forgiven for its lapse of judgment or relapse of judgment had we not gone already through 2 years now since the coup, where Kais Saied has not shown any interest or any intention or any vision for dealing with Tunisia's urgent economic problems that he promised to solve. He said that we will get rid of this cumbersome democracy and instead we will bring prosperity, jobs, dignity to Tunisians. And some fell for that promise. However, we have seen that Qais Said has no interest or ability to deal with these problems. Instead, he has exacerbated the existing economic crisis to the extent that now Tunisians are facing unprecedented problems of queuing up for hours for basic goods, shortages of medicines, water and electricity cuts, and the near collapse of the economy as a whole. Europe does not seem to be able to see this and is unfortunately rewarding Qais Said for bringing Tunisia to this state. Not only dismantling Tunisia's democratic institutions and all the hard-won freedoms and gains since the revolution, but also bringing Tunisia to near bankruptcy. And we are here to say that this is not only dangerous, this is short-sighted and counterproductive. These deals with Tunisia's dictator will not end the problems that seem to be the priority for Europe, because Qais Said has created these problems. It is the state of multiple crises and despair in Tunisia that is feeding migration. And it is and Qais Said's only response to Tunisia's deepening crises and problems is to find scapegoats, to find people to blame for his own failure, whether it is political prisoners, politicians, judges, African migrants, foreign plots, the IMF. Every day there is someone to blame for Qais Said's own failure. And it is time to see that he is the problem. He will not solve Tunisia's problems. He is only interested in deepening these problems in order to remain in power. And these visits and future opportunities only give Qais Said the legitimacy that he has completely lost. As has been mentioned, only less than 10% took part in his so-called elections. So he is facing popular disappointment and a complete loss of popularity and support. And in contrast, those who are working to solve Tunisia's real problems, those who have been trying to build a broad and inclusive and diverse front, opposition front to the coup, and who have been trying to elaborate a common vision and to put forward concrete proposals for dealing with Tunisia's problems in terms of political reforms, constitutional reforms, legislative reforms, and economic reforms, have been put in prison by Qais Said. So we are here to say that we will not stop seeking justice for our parents and for those defending Tunisia's democracy. And we are calling on democratic nations to remain faithful to the values of democracy, freedom, and human rights that they profess to promote, and that they should not give Qais Said's dictatorship the legitimacy and support that it's craving, because he will not provide any solutions. He is not able to provide any solutions. And as has been mentioned, the state of the judiciary in Tunisia is facing a complete breakdown of the rule of law. And that's why we have been active abroad to call for targeted sanctions on Qais Said and his ministers who are directly involved in human rights violations. We have also filed at the African Court on Human Rights and People's Rights. And we are here to call on the call on the government and the International Criminal Court to keep watching Tunisia, because violations are happening and increasing daily, not only against prominent names like our fathers, but against ordinary Tunisians who are being daily arrested and prosecuted for posting criticism on Facebook, for instance. And we should not wait until Qais Said succeeds in re-establishing dictatorship and takes us back to the gross human rights violations under Ben Ali, where thousands and tens of thousands were imprisoned and tortured. We need to put an end to the human rights violations happening today and act before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over immediately to any questions from those here or online. You can use the Q&A function online if you want to ask a question. I can also say that those who have spoken will be available afterwards as well if any of those who are here or following want to ask specific questions, especially from the media. But if there's anything to do publicly now, please go ahead. Any questions here? Yes. This is a call for the government to cease what it's doing and for the ICC to pay attention to what is going on. And if the situation doesn't improve, and frankly, we're not that hopeful that it will, if it doesn't improve, then we will have to take steps before the ICC for those who have the right to seek to take those actions to do so. But what we are doing today is asking the ICC to take notice. Of course, they have a lot on their plate at the moment, a lot of work going on, particularly in relation to Ukraine, and rightly so. But the ICC is an international body that covers all member states, and it should be focused on what is happening in Tunisia as well, and could certainly start looking at that situation and make statements about it, at the very least.
In adding on to that, do you have any meetings set with the ICC or possibly somebody in the Dutch government? Because this is the day of a big immigration debate in the Netherlands, where Tunisia and the suggested Tunisia solution will be debated. Is there any plans for you,
Yes.
for the families to meet either Dutch politicians or members of the ICC?
I know that the families have written to a number of Dutch politicians and have sought their assistance. Perhaps you can comment on what the response has been. As far as the ICC is concerned, not at this stage. We are making this public now, and we will look to take steps in the future in that regard.
We have written to various foreign ministers, European foreign ministers, including the Dutch foreign minister, since the arrest, and to talk about the situation of political prisoners as well as the wider political and human rights situation in Tunisia. Today we are here for one day, and we have media interviews as well as meetings with civil society organizations, lawyers, organizations, etc. But I know that there is another delegation of Tunisian MPs from the dissolved Tunisian parliament who have meetings set up with Dutch MPs in the next few days.
Yes.
Mr. Dixon, Floris van Straten of the Dutch paper
Mhm.
NRC Handelsblad.
Mhm.
This is also further to what she was saying.
Mhm.
Why is it then that you have decided not yet to approach the ICC at this stage? Is it not yet serious enough, the sort of file that you have, or is it purely for pragmatic reasons that since the ICC is so busy with Ukraine and other cases, that you think it's unlikely that they will take this one up at this stage?
It's certainly a serious enough situation, and we are putting together the dossier of all the material, which covers both the attacks on the democratic institutions, on the political leaders across the full spectrum, plus all other groupings as well, in particular judges, and then also the migrant issues. There's a range of, as you know, statements and steps that have been taken there that are unlawful. So we are putting that all together into what can then be tangible evidence for the prosecution to look at. We are not here looking purely, as I emphasized at the beginning, at civil responsibility, but actual criminal responsibility. So we're making sure we're putting together all of the relevant material. It's certainly serious enough, and that's a step that we will look to take in the future if nothing changes. What we're trying to do today is to make a plea to the government to fulfill its obligations, and if they don't do that, then we are going to have to take all of the necessary steps. In these kinds of cases, from my experience, you can't only focus on one avenue. You have to look at all potential options to ensure that you do give yourself the best chance of justice. So what we're also sending to the prosecutor and the ICC today is the message: please take notice. Yes, you have a very, very full schedule, but this is an extremely serious situation. And as the Rome Statute says, it's about the enforcement of international justice. That's the purpose of the ICC. It's not saying the enforcement where possible of international justice. The preamble says the enforcement of international justice. So all steps must be taken. And even if at this stage there is not the capability of taking the step of launching an investigation, well, the ICC can at least make statements about what is happening. And that has been done in the past. That can help to highlight the issue, act as some deterrence. This is something that the ICC can do. Our national police forces all the time say, stop committing crime, stop committing crime. They go around and do it wherever. Why can't the ICC be doing the same? That's not unnecessarily interfering. It's saying, uphold the law, and if you don't, there could be consequences. That serves as a deterrence in our national jurisdictions. It certainly does, and I don't see why it should be any different at the international level. So that's the very least the ICC could be doing, but we will, in getting all the material together, look to take the next step if nothing changes.
And do you have any time frame in mind? I mean, how many months or perhaps even years are you going to?
Well, the sooner the better. I'm sure that the families can emphasize. When it comes to criminal investigations, you want to move quickly because you want to be able to preserve the best evidence, plus also try and stop the crimes going on. So as soon as we are in that position, we will do it. It's not a question of being behind the curve. It's simply a question of getting all of the necessary material together and ensuring that the case that is then put forward is one which the ICC will have no choice but to take on. We are saying now that there are steps that could be taken immediately. Of course, from the government side, they're not doing, but so too from the ICC side. And we will look to move as rapidly as possible, as we've been doing with all the legal actions, because every day is a day in prison. Every day there are risks, and as has been highlighted, the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen is what really is so undermining. And also, it's that intimidates others to stay quiet and not come forward.
We have a question from the online audience,
Yes.
and it's for Ambassador Sassiti. They ask, can you, I don't know if you can hear me. I'll get a mic. It's for you, Ambassador, and it asks, can you elaborate on why you feel it is important for dictators, their accomplices, and their families who are complicit in human rights violation to be brought to justice? I don't know if it was clear enough.
Okay, sorry for whatever reason that wasn't quite functioning. Maybe just to take a step back, there was a comment, I don't know if 2 a.m. is very early or very late. in a social context, I know that for Islamists, it's very early, and for socialists, it's very late. For those who are trying to understand whether we are very late or very early in the process before the ICC, I think it's really important to look at the 4 individuals and the attorney representing them, because they represent real victims, as well as the Tunisian society as a whole. And my main reason to participate in this is not to punish, but to try to say that maybe it's still not too late. That's why I focused on the issue of prevention and deterrence. That's the first step. The second step may be very much prosecution and punishment. But prosecution and punishment is never quite as satisfactory as prevention and deterrence. And I emphasize that. Prosecution is never as satisfactory as prevention and deterrence. In this instance, I don't know if we're at 2 a.m. or 10 p.m., but unfortunately, it seems to me we're quickly moving beyond midnight. And the reason I make that point is because this issue has been approached from a diplomatic and political perspective without clearly an adequate response. Civil court, that is, the African courts, have been approached with civil procedures without an adequate response. In fact, the situation only seems to have gotten worse. So the only thing that is left then is the criminal courts. As I'm sure Mr. Dixon can ascertain here, you try to take a step-by-step approach. And if certain earlier steps don't work, then you have to go one more and one more. And the International Criminal Court was created in view of the fact that the diplomacy at the United Nations and that existing courts like the International Court of Justice may be inadequate. And I don't have firsthand knowledge of events in Tunisia like the witnesses, and I emphasize the word witnesses, not just families of victims, the witnesses they have, and they seem to testify to a point that says we have gone beyond diplomacy. In fact, diplomacy seems to sometimes play a negative role by the actions of some who should be supportive of Tunisian society as a whole. And of course, the civil courts, the courts have been ignored. So the only thing that may be left is the criminal courts. As someone who has seen these events for the last 25, 30 years, I can only emphasize what has been said, which is that acquiescence to the events in Tunisia becomes complicity. And what I fear is that Europe itself, the Western democratic world, which I consider myself very much a part of, may not only be failing Tunisia, but may be failing itself. There's an expression for those who would exchange security for freedom, they will then have neither. So if Europe is looking for some sort of security from what some might call the invasion of the migrants, I fear that it will sacrifice its own values, democratic values, and it certainly will not free itself from the consequences of even more people trying to escape political repression and, let's use the term here, crimes against humanity. So again, why do I feel it's important to punish someone? Punishment will not satisfy me. I don't think punishment will satisfy the witnesses, the victims' families. I think what they want to see is action that will deter and prevent and bring about the freedom of their loved ones and bring about a return of Tunisia to the right path. I was very proud of what Tunisia did 12 years ago. I thought it set a whole new standard, not just for the Arab world, not just for the Muslim world, but the whole world. And to see it go backwards like this, I'm sad. I'm very sad. I'm very sad. I'm sad beyond the sadness of the witnesses here for their families.
Thank you. Other questions here or online? Yeah.
I briefly wanted to ask the families if any of you are currently in Tunisia and how you are contacting your parents, how they have the means to tell you where they're going.
Can I start?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm not in Tunisia. I'm in the UK. I was brought up there because the first time we were exiled there because of Ben Ali. We've actually not had any contact with my dad in 4 months. So the last time I spoke to him was a day before he went, and a day before he was he went into prison. Since then, because of the overstretched lawyers that are willing to risk their freedoms to represent these people, because right now, even if you represent them, you have a case against you or you end up in jail. They've been so overstretched that we found it very hard to even keep up with what's going on. Actually, I had a month ago, I had a press conference in Geneva where just before I found out from another lawyer that my dad was getting death threats in prison. So, I mean, that's how far it's been. So it's been quite, I think that's another thing, is that blackout, that not knowing how he is, not knowing, I mean, thankfully now we've heard some stuff that he's mentally okay, but not being able to speak to him or hear what he thinks, or you know, that's been quite, I mean, it's the first time, and even when I was little and he went to prison, I used to at least see him once a week or once every 2 weeks. This is the first time where we've had no contact in months. So yeah, do you want to say something?
Actually, for my case, I'm living since almost 3 years abroad in France, and yeah, hopefully, because in France, yeah. Actually, we thought that there is a right of each prisoner in Tunisia to have direct visitation to his family without the glass, without barrier. And yeah, we applied to the judge to let my mom, and especially my niece, 11 months, yeah, 11. Her age is 11 months, yeah, baby, and we obtained. We were surprised that we obtained this permission from the judge. And when my mom and my niece went to the prison, the prison director said to her, "Sorry, I need to obey to the Minister of Justice instruction and order. You cannot visit." And she told him, "Okay, let just enter the baby without me." And he said, "No, it's not possible." Even if that is the right of each prisoner once a month. So I was invited to participate or to intervene in the media on the political TV show with the phone from France to this Tunisian TV show. And I was explained this, that my father was depriving of bringing in his books also. He cannot read, he cannot do anything, so he cannot find a way to pass the time there. Yeah, knowing that in a chamber, in a room of 16 square meters with 5 others prisoners, and not political ones, as we call it, social. Yeah, criminals, 2 of them for murders. Anyways, So I intervened in the 16th of June, and the 17th I was receiving on my home there, not in France, but in Tunisia. My mom got an invitation to come to the brigade because the Minister of Justice made a judicial complaint against me. So today I am officially on the exile. I've been exiled. Hopefully that I'm living abroad, and I'm risking 3 years of prison. Yeah, just because I expressed myself to defend my father. Yeah. So that's how things are going on in Tunisia with my father.
Thank you very much. Do you want to bring in Aziz?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Could you please repeat it?
Could you just repeat the question again?
With a mic, because without a mic.
Yes.
My question was, do you currently live in Tunisia, and how do you maintain contact, or do you have any contact with your father in prison?
My sisters live in Tunisia, and my mother lives in Tunisia, and they have been visiting him every week. I currently am studying abroad, so no, I haven't seen my father in 4 months. Actually, in more than that, my father, as soon as he saw that the judiciary was being attacked in 2020, he instructed me to not come back and to be careful, for him to see what exactly is going on. And he was absolutely correct. The coup happened just a bit afterwards, and he was directly targeted personally, and they are trying to target him through his family in many ways. My father's situation is pretty much the same as Elias's father's situation. Not only are they in prison, but the mental torture that they're going through is insane. Imagine being in a room with chain smokers, and you're not allowed to read, you're not allowed to write, and you're not allowed to basically do anything, not even do sports. My father is an avid reader, he's an avid sportsman, and for him to just be separated from his books is a death sentence. It's heartbreaking to see the complete lack of civil society action in Tunisia when it comes to this torture that's ongoing, this torture against political prisoners. I mean, even the most indecent states still decently treat prisoners, but in the case of Tunisia, they seem to want to target them and humiliate them more in prisons. I've been sending letters to my father, and sending these letters is quite painful. And I could tell that he is in a mentally bad place. Since he's a judge, he believed all his life in law, and for him to see the law being so blatantly disrespected and dismantled is basically breaking his heart and breaking him apart. And I hope we have time to recover this lost time that has been because of this tragedy that has been inflicted on us.
Israel, do you want to?
So basically, I follow the same pattern that you've seen here, that we are able to advocate and speak freely because we all live abroad. As Kauthar said, for some of us, this is the second wave of crackdown on the opposition. Our fathers had to leave Tunisia after imprisonment and prosecution in the 80s, and that's why we are based in London. However, so it is safer for us to speak from abroad, unlike those who are risking their lives and sacrificing everything to continue to defend the freedoms that were gained over the last 12 years. For my father, this is the 71st day in prison. As you may have heard, he was in prison, arrested on the 17th of April, just as he was preparing to break the Muslim fast of Ramadan. And since the coup, my father had been summoned for interrogation as part of 9 or 10 various ridiculous charges, all equally fabricated and politically motivated. And every single time he went and appeared before the judge and was interrogated for 10 hours, 12 hours, where the judge was not able to find any evidence for the charges, and every time he was released. But this time they chose this way of sending 100 police officers to the family home to search it and arrest him. So since then, my father was sent to prison pre-trial detention on the 19th of April after having no access to lawyers for 2 days, and then after a long interrogation. And after that, he has been summoned again as part of previous cases. As the lawyers have said, there has been a realization that the detention order was not strong enough or convincing enough, because he was sent for a statement that he has made in public at the National Salvation Front, which the prosecution tried to misrepresent through a doctored video. So no one was convinced of the validity of this detention. So they have been trying to revive old cases for which the judges at the time found no evidence, but he has been summoned repeatedly while he is in prison for interrogation, for which he initially went, but later my father informed the lawyers that he will not continue to cooperate with this farce of endless interrogations, because he is already unfairly imprisoned, and because there is clearly no respect of legal procedures. My mother has been able to visit my father once in the way that Elias described. So prisoners can apply for direct visitation rights in a room without barriers and without multiple guards surrounding the prisoner and the visitors. He was granted that once only. And my father has refused the general visitation rights. So my mother continues to, my mother, who is 73, having gone through this in the 80s several times, now has to go and visit my father weekly to deliver food and clothes, but has not seen him other than that one time. But lawyers have been able to see him, and he health-wise he is fine.
Thank you. Anything further here? Otherwise, I'll go to one more question. Online, please.
Yeah, we have a few more questions from people following in Tunisia that I've emailed them. And the first one is for the ambassador Sasirbi again. Ambassador, what would you advise the United States, who have shown more concern and understanding with recent positive statements by senators and congresspeople?
That's a good question, because of course in the United States we are absorbed with our own situation, a threat to democracy, and we are absorbed with the very visible conflict against democracy in Ukraine. Unfortunately, the focus of politicians is rather fleeting. But what's happening in Tunisia is not just about Tunisia. It is, of course, as I alluded to, about the Arab world. It is about Africa. It is about the Muslim world. But it also, I think, is a reflection upon the United States and Western democracies as a whole. And we in the United States cannot afford to fail here. The United States is not a member of the International Criminal Court. But when I was part of the negotiating team and the preparatory committee in 1998, before and after, the United States was very well represented by several very prominent people from the State Department and the US Congress. So the United States also has an interest in seeing the success of the International Criminal Court. But again, I would like to emphasize that success is not about prosecution and punishment. It's about deterrence and prevention. And deterrence and prevention here has one meaning for the individuals in Tunisian society, but it has a much bigger and broader meaning on a global political level, and particularly for the United States as a global leader. And in many ways, it has a reflection upon what we can expect in the United States. We have seen a sliding. We use the word democracy frequently here, but it's not just about democracy. Of course, it's about free and open societies. And we have seen a sliding away from that commitment. And on the international level, I don't think it's pure rhetoric to say that there is a conflict between autocracy and democracy. And if we see that conflict being fought out on the battlefield in Ukraine, as I believe it was fought out in Bosnia and Herzegovina, don't get lulled into misconceptions that this is a fight between religions, between ethnic groups, between races. It is a fight of autocracy against diversity. And when I use the word diversity, we should also emphasize here political opinion. And it's clear that the four witnesses here that we see are victims, not because of their religion or race or ethnicity. They're victims because they have, or their families or their parents have had different political opinions. And that's how it all in the end goes. Of course, it's always easier to say it's about religion. So in the United States, we've been hearing about the Islamists in Tunisia. And I frequently have had the pleasure, the honor, the opportunity to cross that timeline of 2 a.m. Sometimes I've been categorized as an Islamist. Sometimes I've been categorized as a secular Westerner. But that's what freedom means. And unfortunately, it seems that in Tunisia, you can be neither and safe. You can now only be compliant. So the United States has much at risk here, as much as it does have in Ukraine. But the battlefield is different. And thank God that it is not outright war, but there's no reason to believe that it could not go to that level. And what Tunisia represents in one context is as much as Ukraine represents in another.
Thank you. I'm just going to allow one more question because we have to wrap up for the families, if it could be.
Yeah, the last question.
The final one. Thank you.
Is to the children of the political detainees. And so what are you requesting from the Dutch and maybe the European government? And are you calling for interventions?
Well, I think what we're calling for today is for not to legitimize the ISIS authoritarian regime. We're not calling for intervention. Tunisians don't need intervention. We have a civil society. We have opposition. We have had 12 years where we've understood what democracy is. What we don't want is for Europe and the government here to help what's going on there. And I think that's the main thing that we're asking for. We don't need anything extra than that. But I mean, it seems like it's a bigger ask to tell them to stop and hands off and to stop funding, essentially, the authoritarianism in Tunisia, to stop funding the crackdown, because the money right now with this immigration deal, it's not going to be used for the intended purpose. It's only going to be used further to strengthen the security apparatus in Tunisia and to strengthen the authoritarianism in Tunisia, and to use that money to further crackdowns over there. And that's what that money is going for. And all we want to say is basically stop. You don't even need to help us out. Just don't work against us.
Yeah, I would just rebound off what Kauthar said. Yeah. You know, in Tunisia, Qais Said is installing a dictatorship. That's so clear, and it's time to condemn him clearly and to ensure that no regime funding, I mean that financial supports and aids are going to the regime directly. If you know to support Tunisian people, we have the pleasure of that. You can give them the wheat that they want, the water, the petrol, but no money, because those money, if you follow them, they will serve for human rights violations. He will arrest more people. He will give this money to put his police state and to arrest all dissenting voice against him, all opponents. Today we have a lot of several journalists arrested. We have judges, we have lawyers, we have politicians, we have people, activists. We have, and then next waves he will come to, how to say, normal people, that they are not inactive, ordinary, and so to just answer your question directly, to at least my message to the Dutch government and behalf to European unions, no funding supports to Qais Said, the regime, because it will serve to human rights violations. That's it.
Okay, I'm going to have to end it there, unfortunately, but we will be here afterwards if anybody wants to have any more questions, either in person or online. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you to our speakers. I just wanted to emphasize again the importance of this matter coming to the ICC's attention, but also to say in that regard that it's not a competition between the ICC and the African Court and various bodies. What I was trying to stress earlier is that they can work hand in hand. The African Court is looking at this matter civilly. The ICC can look at it criminally, and that is how it works at the international level. These bodies can work alongside each other. Fortunately, and we are most grateful that the African Court has accepted our cases there and is taking those cases forward, both in relation to the provisional measures that we've sought, while the merits of the case are considered, and that stage will come next. Tunisia has been directed by the court to respond to our applications, but so far nothing has been filed. We'll be sure to alert everyone when something does happen there. So that process is continuing, but we wanted to come here today to The Hague, where the ICC is, to say that the ICC should take note. The government of Tunisia should abide by its obligations, and unless that changes and changes soon, we're going to have to take further action at the international criminal level. Thank you very much, everyone, and if there are, any further questions, we will be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.